So, I gave Tony nearly all the bread I made, so I'm making some more. I've only just brought the dough together, so I'm letting it hydrate the flour. And then I'll start stretching it when I finish my live stream. So I did manage to fast for nearly 26 hours. And I wasn't even hungry. I could have easily continued fasting, except I was getting really, really cold. And because my chest's a bit bad, I thought that's bad. I don't want to be getting really cold. And I was quite breathless when I was walking down to Tony's, and I caught the bus back with all the plants. So it takes me about half an hour to walk there. It's not very far away. I could walk faster. So anyway, yeah, so I decided once I'd got over 24 hours, I'd break the fast because I was really, really cold. I do get cold when I'm fasting. Doesn't usually concern me, but it does when my chest's bad, so I'm still cold now. But I'm going to go and wrap myself up in my duvet after I finish this live stream and just get out to stretch my dough and put it in its tin later on. So, Chapter 13. The benefits obtained through the rejection of the apprehensions of the imagination answers certain objections and explains the difference between the natural and the supernatural imaginative apprehensions. 1. Like the observation we made concerning natural forms, the benefits from voiding the imagination of supernatural apprehensions can be ascertained through the 5 kinds of harm caused in the soul if it desires to possess these forms interiorly. But besides these, there are other benefits of deep spiritual repose and quietude. In addition to the tranquillity a person naturally enjoys when freed from images and forms, there is a freedom from care about the discernment of good ones from evil, and about how one ought to behave with different kinds. Finally, one would be absolved from the drudgery and waste of time that would result from desiring spiritual masters, both to discern the good apprehensions from the evil ones and to ascertain the kind of apprehension received. People do not have to know this, since they should not pay attention to any of these apprehensions. The time and energy that would be wasted in trying to discern them can be employed in another, more profitable exercise, the movement of the will toward God, and in solicitude about the search after spiritual and sensory nakedness and poverty, the desire to lack all the consoling support of the apprehensions, both interior and exterior. Individuals practice this latter by desiring and striving after detachment from these forms, since they thereby receive the great gain of approaching God, who has neither image nor form nor figure. They will approach God more closely the more they withdraw from all imaginative forms, images, and figures. 2. Perhaps your question will be, why do many spiritual persons counsel souls to strive for profit in the communications and feelings given by God, and to desire favours from Him in order to have something to give Him, since if God gives nothing to us, we shall have nothing to give to Him? And you will establish this with a text from St. Paul, do not extinguish the Spirit, 1 Thessalonians 5:19. Also one from the Song of Songs, in which the bridegroom says to the bride, put me as a seal upon your heart, and as a seal upon your arm. Trying to turn the page. Song of Songs 8:6. For this seal is a certain apprehension. And all of this, you will say, according to our doctrine, must not only be unsought, but rejected and put aside, even though God bestows it. And evidently, since God grants this gift, He does so for a good purpose, and it will be effective. You will add that we must not throw away pearls, and it is a kind of pride to refuse God's gifts as though we were self-sufficient without them. 3. In answer to this objection, our explanation in chapters 15 and 16 of Book 2 must necessarily be kept in mind. It says in the footnote the reference is actually in Ascent 2, 16 and 17. To a great extent the objection is answered there. We stated that the good resulting in the soul from supernatural apprehensions that come from a good source is produced passively, without any operation of the faculties. At the very moment these apprehensions are represented to the senses. It is consequently unnecessary for the will to act in order to admit them. As we said, if souls were to desire to act with their faculties through their base natural operation, they would impede the supernatural which God is producing in them by means of these apprehensions, rather than derive profit from their own labour. Oh, sorry, that's the end of that sentence. I'll read it again. As we said, if the souls were to desire to act with their faculties through their base natural operation, they would impede the supernatural which God is producing in them by means of these apprehensions, rather than derive profit from their own labour. But since the spirit of these imaginative apprehensions is given passively to the soul, they must maintain a passive attitude, without application of their interior or exterior actions to anything. And this attitude would preserve the spiritual feelings of God, because individuals would not then lose them through their own low kind of operation, nor would they extinguish the spirit. People extinguish the spirit by wanting to conduct themselves in a way different from the way God is leading them. They act this way if they desire, when God gives them the spirit passively, as he does through these apprehensions, to be acted by working with the intellect or by desiring something in these apprehensions. This is clear, for if the soul would then want to work, its activity would necessarily be no more than natural. On its own it can do no more, since the soul does not move itself to a supernatural work, nor can it, but God moves it and places it in this supernatural activity. If spiritual persons then were to desire to make use of their own efforts, they would necessarily impede by their activity the passive communication of God, which is the Spirit. They would be engaging in their own work, which is of another and lower kind than that which God is communicating to them. The work of God is passive and supernatural. That of the soul is active and natural. This natural activity is what would extinguish the spirit. 4. That this is a more lowly work is also clear, for the faculties of the soul cannot of themselves reflect and work except on some form, figure and image, which would be the rind and accident of the substance and spirit. This substance and spirit is not united with the faculties of the soul in true understanding and love, until the operation of the faculties ceases. For the aim of this operation is the reception of substantial understanding and love through those forms. The difference between the active and passive operation and the advantage of one over the other is the same as that between what is being done and what is already done, or what one intends to attain and what has already been attained. Thus we also deduce that if individuals were to desire to employ their faculties actively in these supernatural apprehensions, by which, as we said, they receive the Spirit passively from God, they would be doing nothing less than abandoning what has been accomplished in order to redo it. Neither would they be enjoying what was done, nor by their activity doing anything other than impeding God's work. For as we said, these actions cannot independently attain the spirit God was giving to the soul without them. If the soul pays heed to these imaginative apprehensions, it directly extinguishes the spirit that God infuses by means of them. Consequently, a person should abandon these apprehensions and behave passively and negatively, because then God moves the soul to what transcends its power and knowledge. The prophet accordingly declared, "I will stand on my watch and fix my foot on my tower, and I will contemplate what it said to me." Hebrews 2:1. This is like saying, "I will be raised above the watch of the faculties, and take no step forward in my operations. Thus I will be able to contemplate what is told me. That is, I will understand and taste what is communicated to me supernaturally. Five. The words of the bridegroom that were quoted in the objection should be interpreted as referring to the love he asks of the bride. It is a characteristic of love to assimilate lovers to one another in their spiritual faculties. As a result, he tells her to set him as a mark on her heart. Song of Songs 8:6. There were all the arrows of love, the actions and motives of love. Coming from the quiver, strike. He does this so that all the arrows might strike him, who is there as their target, and thus all are directed to him, and the soul would become like him through its actions and movements of love until transformed in him. He tells her to set him also as a mark on her arm, because the act of love is on the arm, since by the arm the beloved is held and caressed. 6. In these apprehensions coming from above, imaginative or any other kind, it matters not if there be visions, locutions, spiritual feelings or revelations. Individuals should pay no attention to the letter and rind, what is signified, represented or made known. They should pay heed not to the feelings of delight or sweetness, not to the images, but to the feelings of love that are caused. Only for the sake of moving the spirit to love should the soul at times recall the images and apprehensions that produced love. The effect produced by the remembrance of this communication is not as strong as the effect at the time the communication was received. Yet when the communication is recalled, there is a renewal of love and an elevation of the mind to God. This is especially true when the soul remembers some figures, images, or supernatural feelings. These are usually so imprinted on it that they last a long time. Some are never erased from the soul. These apprehensions produce, almost as often as remembered, divine effects of love, sweetness, light, and so on, sometimes in a greater degree, sometimes in a lesser, because God impressed them for this reason. This is consequently a great grace, for those on whom God bestows it possess within themselves a mine of blessings. 7. The figures producing such effects are vividly impressed on the soul, for they are not like other images and forms preserved in the fantasy. The soul has no need of recourse to this faculty when it desires to remember them, for it is aware that it has them within itself as an image in a mirror. When a soul possesses these figures formally within itself, it can safely recall them to obtain the effect of love I mentioned. They will not be a hindrance to the union of love in faith, providing the soul does not desire to be absorbed with the figure. It must profit from the love by immediately leaving aside the figure. In this way the remembrance will instead be a help to the soul. 8. It is difficult to discern when these images are impressed on the soul and when on the fantasy, for those of the fantasy are also quite frequent. Some persons who usually have imaginative visions find that these same visions are very frequently represented in their fantasy, either because they themselves possess a very lively faculty, so that with little thought the ordinary figure is immediately represented and sketched on it, or because the devil causes these representations, or also because God causes them without impressing them formally in the soul. They can be discerned through their effects nonetheless, for those that are of natural or diabolical origin produce no good effect or spiritual renewal in the soul, no matter how often they are remembered. The individual beholds them in dryness. When remembered, however, the imaginative apprehensions from God produce some good effect by means of that which they are imparted to the soul the first time. Yet the formal apprehensions, those impressed on the soul, yield some effect almost every time they are recalled. 9. Anyone with experience of these will easily be able to tell the difference between the two, for the diversity between them is very clear. I merely assert that those impressed formally on the soul in a lasting way are of rarer occurrence, but whatever may be their kind, it is good for the soul to have no desire to comprehend anything, save God alone in hope through faith. As for the other point in the objection, that it is apparently pride to reject these apprehensions if they are good, I answer, rather it is prudent humility to benefit by them in the best way, as has been mentioned, and be guided along the safest path. Chapter 14. Spiritual knowledge in the memory. 1. We placed apprehensions of spiritual knowledge in the third class, not because they pertain to the corporeal fantasy, for they do not have a corporeal image and form, as the others do, but because they are likewise the object of spiritual reminiscence and memory. There's a footnote here that says, as John turns now to the spiritual or intellectual memory, apart from the fantasy, it is worth noting that books 2 and 3 of this work often extend beyond the topic of purification of the spiritual faculties. After the soul receives knowledge, After the soul receives knowledge of this sort, it can freely bring back that knowledge. Let me start again. After the soul receives knowledge of this sort, it can freely bring that knowledge back to memory. It does not remember this through the effigy or image left in the corporeal sense or faculty, for since it is a corporeal sense faculty, the fantasy has no capacity for spiritual forms, but it remembers intellectually and spiritually through the form impressed on the soul, which is also a formal or spiritual form, idea or image, or through the effect produced. As a result, I classify these apprehensions among those of the memory, even though they do not belong to those of the fantasy. 2. We have given a sufficient explanation in chapter 24 of book 2. Actually in Ascent 2:26, the footnote says, where we discussed intellectual apprehensions of this kind of knowledge, and the attitude toward it is required for advancement to union with God. See that chapter, because there we have explained how these apprehensions are of two kinds, one referring to the Creator and the other to creatures. Concerning what has to do with our intention here, which is to explain the way the memory should conduct itself in order to advance to union, I merely state, as I have just explained in the preceding chapter about formal images, to which class this knowledge of creatures belongs, that this knowledge may be remembered when it produces a good effect, not in order to retain it, but to awaken the knowledge and love of God. But if the remembrance of this knowledge of creatures produces no good effect, the soul should never desire the memory of it. But as for knowledge of the Creator, I declare that a person should strive to remember it as often as possible, because it will produce in the soul a notable effect. For as we affirmed here, the communication of this knowledge are touches and spiritual feelings of union with God, the goal to which we are guiding the soul. The memory does not recall these through any form, image, or figure that may have been impressed on the soul, for those touches and feelings of union with the Creator do not have any. In remembrance, it remembers them through the effect of light, love, delight, spiritual renewal, and so on, produced in it. Something of this effect is renewed as often as the soul recalls them. Chapter 15. general rule of conduct for spiritual persons in their use of the memory. To conclude the discussion of the memory, then, it will be worthwhile to delineate briefly a general method for the use of spiritual persons, that they may be united with God according to this sense. The footnote says he refers to the memory here as a sense faculty. See chapter 14, note 1. Even if clearly understood from what we said, the reader will grasp it more easily in a summary. The following must be kept in mind. Our aim is union with God in the memory through hope. The object of hope is something unpossessed. The less other objects are possessed, the more capacity and ability there is to hope for this one object, and consequently, the more hope, the greater the possessions, the less capacity and ability for hoping, and consequently so much less hope. Accordingly, in the measures that individuals dispossess their memory of forms and objects which are not God, they will fix it on God and preserve it empty, so as to hope for the fullness of their memory from Him. What souls must do in order to live in perfect and pure hope in God is this: as often as distinct ideas, forms, and images occur to them, they should immediately, without resting in them, turn to God with loving affection, in emptiness of everything rememberable. They should not think or look on these things for longer than is sufficient for the understanding and fulfilment of their obligations, if these refer to this. And then they should consider these ideas without becoming attached or seeking gratification in them, lest the effects of them be left in the soul. Thus people are not required to stop recalling and thinking about what they must do and know, for if they are not attached to the possession of these thoughts, they will not be harmed. The verses of the Mount in chapter 13 of the first book are helpful in this practice. So the footnote says in Numbers 10 to 13, the verses in the sketch of the Mount are applicable at every level and in all dimensions of the purgative process. 2. Yet it must be noted here that by our doctrine we are not in agreement, nor do we desire to be, with that of those pestiferous people who, persuaded by the pride and envy of Satan, have sought to remove from the eyes of the faithful the holy and necessary use and renowned cult of images of God and his saints. Footnote 3 is referring to the iconoclasts of the 8th and 9th centuries who opposed the use of icons, and possibly to the Alumbrados and Protestants of his time. Our doctrine is far different from theirs. We are not asserting, as they do, that there be no images or veneration of them. We are explaining the difference between these images and God, and how souls should use the painted image in such a way as not to suffer hindrance in their movement toward the living image, and how they should pay no more attention to images than is required for advancing to what is spiritual. The means are good and necessary for the attainment of the end, as are images of reminding us of God and the saints. But when people use and dwell on the means as though they were more than mere means, their excessive use of them becomes as much an impediment as anything else. The impediment is even greater in the case of supernatural visions and images, with which I am especially dealing here, and which are the cause of many delusions and dangers. There is no delusion or danger in the remembrance, veneration, and esteem of images that the Catholic Church proposes to us in a natural manner, since in these images nothing else is esteemed than the person represented. The memory of these images will not fail to benefit a person, because this remembrance is accompanied with love for whoever is represented. Images will always help individuals toward union with God, provided that no more attention is paid to them than necessary for this love, and that souls allow themselves to soar, when God bestows the favour, from the painted image to the living God, in forgetfulness of all creatures and things pertaining to creatures. Chapter 16. This is the last one I'm reading. The beginning of the treatise on the dark night of the will, a division of the emotions of the will. 1. We would have achieved nothing by purging the intellect and memory in order to ground them in the virtues of faith and hope. Had we neglected, hang on a minute, I'm going to have to read this again. We would have achieved nothing by purging the intellect and memory in order to ground them in the virtues of faith and hope. Had we? Had we neglected the purifications of the will through charity, the third virtue? Through charity works done in faith are living works and have high value. Through charity works done in faith are living works and have high value. Without it they are worth nothing, as St. James affirms. Without works of charity faith is dead. James 2:20. For a treatise on the active night and the denudation of this faculty, with the aim of forming and perfecting in this virtue of the charity of God, I have found no more appropriate passage than the one in chapter 6 of Deuteronomy, where Moses commands, "You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, and with all your soul, and with all your strength." Deuteronomy 6:5. This passage contains all that spiritual persons must do, and all I must teach them here is that... This passage contains all that spiritual persons must do, and all I must teach them here if they are to reach God by union of the will through charity. In it, human beings receive the command to employ all the faculties, appetites, operations, and emotions of their soul in God, so that they will use this ability and strength for nothing else, in accord with David's words. 42 meam ad te custodiam. I will keep my strength for you. Psalm 59:10. 2. The strength of the soul comprises the faculties, passions, and appetites. All this strength is ruled by the will. When the will directs these faculties, passions, and appetites toward God, turning away from all that is not God, the soul preserves its strength for God and comes to love him with all its might. There's a long footnote here. The will plays a decisive role in the purification process in that it moves the other faculties. Because of the appetitive nature of the will, John speaks of emotions, appetites, and so on, instead of apprehensions. Since the theological virtues, each in its own area, purify the whole person, charity purifies the whole appetitive or affective dimension. In dealing in the following chapters with the purification of the entire affective part, not just the spiritual faculty, John discusses the active purification of the senses more than he does in the first book. That's the end of the footnote. So a person may do this. We will discuss here purifying the will of all inordinate emotions. These inordinate emotions are the source of unruly appetites, affections, and operations, and the basis for failure to preserve one's strength for God. There are 4 of these emotions or passions: joy, hope, sorrow, and fear. These passions manifestly keep the strength and ability of the soul for God and direct it toward him. When they are so ruled that a person rejoices only in what is purely for God's honour and glory, hopes for nothing else, feels sorrow only about matters pertaining to this, and fears only God. The more people rejoice over something outside God, the less intense will be their joy in God, and the more their hope goes out towards something else, the less there is of it for God, and so on with the others. There's another footnote here. Throughout his works, John accepts the scholastic reduction of the 11 passions defined by Aristotle into 4 principal ones. And then it says, to see Aquinas, Summa Theologia 1-2. And I think it's 25:4 and 23:4. And then it gives a lot of references in St. John of the Cross to compare that to. 3. To give a complete doctrine on this subject, we will, as is our custom, discuss individually these four passions as well as the appetites of the will. The entire matter of reaching union with God consists in purging the will of its appetites and emotions, so that from a human and lowly will it may be changed into the divine will, made identical with the will of God. 4. The less strongly the will is fixed on God and the more dependent it is on creatures, the more these four passions combat the soul and reign in it. A person then very easily rejoices in what deserves no rejoicing, hopes for what brings no profit, sorrows over what should perhaps cause rejoicing, and fears where there is no reason to fear. 5. When these emotions go unbridled, they are the source of all vices and imperfections, but when they are put in order and calmed, they give rise to all the virtues. It should be known that, in the measure that one of the passions is regulated according to reason, the others are also. These four passions are so interlinked and brotherly that where one goes actually, the others go virtually. If one is recollected actually, the other three in the same measure are recollected virtually. If the will rejoices over something, it must consequently in the same degree hope for it, with the virtual inclusion of sorrow and fear. And in the measure that it loses satisfaction in this object, fear, sorrow and hope will also be lost. We find a reference to the will and the four passions in the figure Ezekiel saw, 4 animals with 4 faces and only one body, in which the wings of one were bound to those of the other. Each one went forward, and while going ahead they did not turn back. Ezekiel 1:6-12. The feathers of each of these emotions are so connected to those of the others that wherever one actually directs its face, its operations, the others need to go virtually. And when one is lowered, as is affirmed there, all the others must be lowered, and when it is raised, the others are raised too. Ezekiel 1:19-25. Where your hope goes, there too will go your joy, fear and sorrow, and if it turns back, they too will turn back, and so on with each of the other passions. 6. Accordingly, you should keep in mind that wherever one of these passions goes, the entire soul, the will, and the other faculties will also go, and they will live as prisoners of this passion, and the other 3 passions will be alive in the one, so as to afflict the soul with their chains and prevent it from soaring to the liberty and repose of sweet contemplation and union. As a result, Boethius claimed that if you desire a clear understanding of the truth, you must cast from yourself joys, hope, fear and sorrow. And it says here, footnote 3, see the Consolation of Philosophy 1:7. As long as these passions reign in the soul, they will not allow it to live in the tranquillity and peace necessary for the wisdom it can receive naturally and supernaturally. That's the end of chapter 16. I need a drink. All that reading has made my throat dry. That'll do. For now. So I need to have a siesta, I think, when I've done all my stretches on my door. It'll need at least another 2 and perhaps another 3. I need to get warm. I am a bit warmer than I was. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. Amen. I was just thinking about the Marillion concert I went to when I was 17. Oh, it was fantastic. That's why I remember it so well. Going to Marillion concerts was the first thing, really, I did independently. Like, it was what I wanted to do. When I was old enough to go there by myself, I mean, not with my family, or on a school trip or something like that. So, quite a lot I went to.